was defeated by 230 votes, the largest defeat in the history of our democracy. The first government to be defeated by more than 200 votes. And indeed, the government itself could barely muster more than 200 votes. Last week, they lost a vote on the finance bill. That's what's called supply. Yesterday, they lost a vote by the biggest margin ever. That's what's regarded as confidence. By any convention of this House, by any precedence, loss of confidence and supply should mean they do the right thing and resign. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has consistently claimed that her deal, which has now been decisively rejected, was good for Britain, workers and businesses. If she is so confident of that, if she genuinely believes it, she should have nothing to fear from going to the people and letting them decide. In this week, in 1910, the British electorate went to the polls. They did so because Herbert Asquith's Liberal government had been unable to get Lloyd George's People's Budget through the House of Lords. They were confident in their arguments, and they went to the people, and they were returned to office. And it's still how our democracy works. When we have a government that cannot govern in the absence of a written constitution, it is these conventions that guide us. If a government cannot get its legislation through Parliament, if a government cannot get its legislation through Parliament, it must go to the country for a new mandate, and that must apply when it is on the key issue of the day.
Isn't the Leader of the Opposition engaging in a piece of shameless political opportunism which puts party interest ahead of national interest? And isn't he simply trying to disguise the fact that on this great issue he has no policy?
Mr. Speaker, in 2017, the Prime Minister and her party thought they could call an election and they would win it. They thought they'd return with an overall majority, and there was an enormous, indeed the biggest since 1945, increase in the Labour vote during that campaign when people saw what our policies actually were. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister asked to be given a mandate, that's what she did. She bypassed the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, which was, as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, pointed out, designed to give some stability to the Tory Lib Dem coalition government, to ensure that the Lib Dems couldn't hold the Conservatives to ransom by constantly threatening to collapse the coalition. The Fixed-Term Parliament Act was never intended to prop up a zombie government. And there can be no doubt that this is indeed a zombie government.
The right honourable gentleman, if he's successful in this motion this evening, there may be a general election in a few short weeks. In that Labour Party manifesto, will they state whether they will be a party of Brexit or a party against Brexit? It's a simple question. What is the answer?
Mr. Speaker, we are a democratic party, and our party will decide what policy we fight the election on. But in the meantime, we are very clear. There has to be a customs union. There has to be access to European trade and markets. There has to be a protection of rights. There has to be a rejection of a no-deal Brexit. And as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, last week this government became the first for more than 40 years to lose on a finance bill. And a shocking first for this government. A shocking first. It forced a heavily pregnant member of this House, my friend the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, to delay a scheduled caesarean to come to vote, all because of their cynical breaking of trusted pairing arrangements. I think we need to examine that and examine our procedures to ensure such a thing can never happen again.
Point of order, Anna Soubry. Mr. Speaker, could you assist the House, please? This is an important matter. I say this as a woman, but we need to establish once and for all. Was the honourable lady offered a pair? Yes, I think all of us and the public need to know so.
Clerk reminds me that's not a point of order. My understanding is that there was a pairing opportunity. I don't need anyone else. Order. My understanding is that there was a pairing opportunity, but the issue was aired in the chamber on Monday and again yesterday. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, is absolutely entitled to highlight his concern about this matter, which I know is widely shared, but it should not be subject now to further points of order. I hope that that satisfies her. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nothing demonstrates the sheer incompetence of this government quite like the Brexit negotiations. Yesterday's historic and humiliating defeat was the result of 2 years of chaos and failure. It's now clear this government is not capable of winning support for its core plan on the most vital issue facing this country. The Prime Minister has lost control, and the government has lost the ability to govern. Within 2 years, they've managed to turn a deal from what was supposed to be, I remember this very well, one of the easiest in human history into a national embarrassment. In that time, we've seen the Prime Minister's demands quickly turned into one humiliating climb down after another. Brexit ministers have come, Brexit ministers have gone, but the shambles has remained unchanged, culminating in an agreement which was described by one former cabinet minister as, and I quote, the worst of all worlds. Let's be clear. The deal the Prime Minister wanted this Parliament to support would have left the UK in a helpless position, facing the choice of either seeking and paying for an extended transition period or trapped in the backstop. The Prime Minister may claim the backstop would never come into force.
Order. No, I'm sorry. There are courtesies in this place. A member can seek to intervene. He or she should not do so out of frustration by shrieking an observation across the floor. Well, whether we say shriek or yell or bellow or shout, it was very noisy and it was disorderly. And the Right Honourable Gentleman knows I hold him in the highest regard and I have great affection for him, but he must behave better. No, I'm not in. Yes, but who takes whether an intervention is taken or not? No, there's no all right about it, I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman. The person who has the floor decides whether to take an intervention. That's life. That's the reality. That's the way it has always been. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But who has confidence in this government's ability to negotiate a future trade deal with the EU by December 2020, after the shambles we've all witnessed over the past 2 years? This Frankenstein deal is now officially dead, and the Prime Minister is trying to blame absolutely everybody else. I give way.
Allow me to intervene. In modern British history, Prime Ministers, when faced with even a fraction of the titanic and calamitous margin that was faced by the Prime Ministers yesterday, they have done the right and honourable thing, resigned and called a general election. Would my right honourable friend agree that in the pursuit of power and in the trappings of office that she has now forgotten what is right and honourable?
I thank my friend for the intervention, as I've made it very clear. All the precedents are that when a government's had the defeat that this government has had, it's time to resign and allow the people to elect a new Parliament to deal with the issues facing this country. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. The blame for this mess lies firmly at the feet of the Prime Minister and a government, which time after time has made hollow demands and given what turned out to be false promises. They say they want this Parliament to be sovereign, yet when their plans have come up against scrutiny, they've done all they can to obstruct and evade. The Prime Minister's original plan was to push through a deal without the appropriate approval of this Parliament, only to be forced into holding a meaningful vote by the courts and by members of this House to whom I pay tribute for ensuring we actually got the meaningful vote last night in this House.
Yes.
I'm grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for giving way. As I understand it, he will allow his party to decide whether or not he will deliver Brexit should he become Prime Minister. His party has already decided that if he is not successful in getting a general election, he should support a people's vote. If he does not win the vote tonight, will he then support moves in this House to give us a people's vote?
I'm sure the member is fully aware of the decision made by my party's conference that, as the next phase of it, all options are on the table, including the option that he has referred to. I give way to my friend at the back.
Would my honourable friend confirm whether, in this national crisis, the Prime Minister has telephoned the Leader of the Opposition to ask for a meeting to discuss the way forward for our country?
I haven't had such a call as yet, Mr. Speaker. I have my phone.
It's not funny and it's not statesmanlike.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should proceed with this debate. And the Prime Minister's original plan was to push through a deal without approval, as I pointed out, and forced into it by the courts. But since losing its majority in the 2017 general election, the government has had numerous opportunities to engage with others and listen to their views, not just here in Westminster but across the country. Their whole framing of the EU withdrawal bill was about giving excessive power to the Secretary of State for Brexit at the expense of Parliament. It was a bill that Henry VIII would have been very proud of. Yesterday's decisive defeat is the result of the Prime Minister not listening, ignoring businesses, unions and members of this House. She has wasted 2 years recklessly ploughing on with her doomed strategy. And even when it was clear that her botched and damaging deal could not remotely command support here or across the country, she decided to waste even more time by pulling the meaningful vote on December the 11th on the empty promise, and it was an absolutely empty promise, of obtaining legal assurances on the backstop. Another month wasted before the House could come to its decision last night. Some on the government side have tried to portray the Prime Minister's approach as stoical. Mr. Speaker, what we've seen over the past few months is not stoical. What we've witnessed is the Prime Minister acting in her narrow party interest rather than the public interest.
Yes.
Her party is fundamentally split on this issue. Fundamentally split, Mr. Speaker, when less than 200 of their own MPs were prepared to support the Prime Minister last night. This constrains the Prime Minister so much that she simply cannot command a majority in this House and on the most important issue facing this country without rupturing her party. And it's for this reason the government can no longer govern. Yesterday, the Prime Minister shook her head when I said that she had treated Brexit as a matter only for the Conservative Party. Yet, within half an hour of the vote being announced, the honourable member for Grantham and Stamford commented, "She has conducted the argument as if this was a party political matter rather than a question of profound national importance." How right he was, how wrong she was to threaten him before the vote took place. I know many people, Mr. Speaker, across the country will be frustrated and deeply worried about the insecurity around Brexit. But If this divided government continues in office, the uncertainty and risks can only grow.
The Leader of the Opposition for giving way. When those cross-party talks start, would he tell the House which of the Scarlet Pimpernel will come? The Leader of the Opposition who campaigns for Remain in London and the South East, or the Leader of the Opposition who campaigns for Brexit up north? We need to know.
Mr. Speaker, there has been no offer of all-party talks. There has been no communication on all-party talks. All the Prime Minister said was she might talk to some members of the House. That isn't reaching out. That isn't discussing it. That is not recognising the scale of the defeat they suffered last night. And, Mr. Speaker, it's not just over Brexit that the government is failing dismally, letting down the people of this country. There has been a Windrush scandal, the shameful denial of rights, the detention and even deportation of our own citizens. The government's flagship welfare policy, universal credit, is causing real and worsening poverty across this country. And just yesterday, under the cover of the Brexit vote, they sneaked out changes that will make some pensioner households thousands of pounds worse off. Those changes build on the scourge of poverty, causing measures inflicted on the people of this country, including the bedroom tax, the two-child limit, the abominable rape clause, the outsourced and deeply flawed work capability assessment, the punitive sanctions regime and the deeply repugnant benefit freeze. People across this country, Mr. Speaker, whether they voted Leave or whether they voted Remain, know full well that the system isn't working for them. If you're up against it and you voted Remain, and you're up against it and you voted for Leave, this government doesn't speak for them, doesn't represent them and cannot represent them. Food bank use has increased almost exponentially, and more people are sleeping on our streets, and numbers have shamefully swelled every year. The Conservative Party used to call itself the Party of Home Ownership. They're now called the Party of Homelessness in this country. Care is being denied to our elderly, with Age UK estimating at 1.2 million older people not receiving the care they need. 7 billion cut from the adult social care budgets in the past 9 years. Our NHS is in crisis. Waiting time targets at accident emergency. I'm talking about waiting times at accident emergency departments and for cancer patients that have not been met since 2015, and they've never been met under the government of this Prime Minister. Not yet. The NHS has endured the longest funding squeeze in its history, leaving it short-staffed to the tune of 100,000. and NHS trusts and providers in over £1 billion in deficit. The human consequences are clear. Life expectancy is now going backwards in the poorest parts of our country and stagnating overall. This is unprecedented. Another shameful first for this government. Another reason this government should no longer remain in office, and why this motion of no confidence is so important.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is making some powerful arguments. Not very well, but he's making some very powerful arguments. I don't know if he could help us, though, with this. I saw an opinion poll at the weekend. If there was any merit in his arguments, could he explain to the House why it is that this party is 6 points ahead in the polls? Could it be that it's because he's the most hopeless leader of the opposition that we've ever had?
I thank the member for Broxtowe for her intervention. I look forward to testing opinion in a general election in the ballot box when we'll be able to elect a Labour government in this country.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. He's right to put on record current concerns about uncertainty in the country, and absolutely right to talk about poverty. Can he confirm that it is the position of the British Labour Party to rule out a no-deal Brexit? And can he understand why the party that claims to be the traditional party of business won't do the same?
I can absolutely confirm that. We have voted against a no-deal Brexit. Apparently, the Business Secretary thinks that's a good idea. The Prime Minister was unable to answer my question on this during Prime Minister's question time. No-deal Brexit would be very dangerous and very damaging for jobs and industry all across this country. I know some... one more time.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. Under this government, we see our NHS in crisis, education underfunded, and our communities have been devastated through their austerity agenda. More people homeless, more people living in poverty, more people using food banks. If they disagree with that, why don't they call a general election?
I thank my friend for that intervention and for his work representing his constituency. On this side of the House, we are determined to force this government to accept the reality of the defeat last night and to force this government to go to the people so that they can decide whether they want a party in office that promotes inequality, poverty and injustice in Britain, or the Labour alternative, which is bringing people together however they voted in the referendum. I know some members of this House are sceptical, and members of the public, I believe, could be also described as sceptical, but I truly believe that a general election would be the best outcome for this country. As the Prime Minister pointed out in a speech yesterday, both the Labour Party and Conservative Party stood on manifestos that accepted the result of the referendum. Surely any government would be strengthened in trying to negotiate Brexit by being given a fresh mandate for the people to follow their chosen course. I know many people at home will say, well, we've had 2 general elections and a referendum in the last 4 years. And for the people of Scotland, it's 2 UK-wide elections, 1 Scottish parliamentary election and 2 referendums in 5 years. So while Brenda from Bristol might gasp, not another one, spare a thought for Bernie from Bute. But, Mr. Speaker, the scale of the crisis means we need a government with a fresh mandate. A general election can bring people together. Focus on all the issues that actually unite us, the need to solve the crisis in our NHS, our children's schools and our care for the elderly. And we all have a responsibility to call out abuse. And that has become too common. That, Mr. Speaker, has become too common. Whether that's the abuse of members of this House whether that's the abuse members receive or the abuse that is...
Order. No, order. Apologies. No, Mr. Morris, don't yell from a sedentary position like that. If you seek to intervene, you seek to do so in the usual way. That's the only way to do it. Just because you're angry doesn't justify you behaving in that way. Stop it. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we can all unite. I'm sure we can all unite. We can all unite in condemning racist abuse in any form whatsoever within our society. And too many of our constituents have faced that since the toxic debate in the last referendum and, if I may say so, the government's hostile environment policies on the Windrush generation. Mr. Speaker, many media pundits and members of this House say there is currently no majority in this House for a general election. Let the members of this House decide. But, Mr. Speaker, it's clear there is no majority for this government's Brexit deal, and there is no majority either for a no deal. I want to pay tribute to all members of this House who, like the Labour front bench, are committed to both opposing the Prime Minister's bad deal, which we voted down last night, and ruling out the catastrophe of no deal. But I do believe that following the defeat of the government's plan, a general election is the best outcome for this country, as the Labour Party conference agreed last September. A general election, Mr. Speaker, would give new impetus to negotiations, a new Prime Minister with a new mandate, and not just to break the deadlock on Brexit, but to bring fresh ideas to the many problems faced by our constituents. The problems that people face, such as very low pay and insecure work, of in-work poverty which is increasing, the problems of trying to survive on universal credit and living in deep poverty, the scandal of inadequate social care, which might not concern the member opposite, but it does concern millions of people around this country. The crisis, Mr. Speaker, in facing local authorities, health services and schools starved of resources. The housing and the homelessness crisis, where so many of our fellow citizens have no roof over their head night after night. They are looking to Parliament. They are looking to Parliament for them a better and fairer society.
Is the Honourable Gentleman just pausing? Yes, quite right, absolutely. Very reasonable, very sensible. Thank you. Point of order, Mark Francois.
Speaker, is it not... Well, give me a go. Is it not often the practice in this House that if someone speaking from the dispatch box refers to another member and challenges them, they then normally take an intervention?
Commonplace, but it is not in any sense obligatory. Commonplace, but not obligatory. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the House backs this motion today, then I welcome the wide-ranging debates we'll have for the future of our country and the future of our relationship with the European Union, with all the options on the table. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, a Prime Minister confident of what she describes as a good deal and committed, as she claims, to tackling burning injustices should have nothing to fear from such an election. But, Mr. Speaker, if the House does not back this motion today, then surely it's incumbent on all of us to keep all the options on the table, to rule out the disastrous no deal and offer a better solution than the Prime Minister's deal, which was so roundly defeated yesterday. Mr. Speaker, this government cannot govern and cannot command the support of Parliament on the most important issue facing our country. Every single previous Prime Minister in this situation would have resigned and called an election. It is the duty of this House to show the lead where this government has failed and pass a motion of no confidence so that the people of this country can decide who their MPs are and who their government is and who will deal with the crucial issues facing the people of this country. I commend my motion to the House.
Order. The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last night the House rejected the deal the government has negotiated with the European Union. Today it is asked a simpler question. Should the next step be a general election? I believe that is the worst thing we could do. It would deepen... It would deepen division when we need unity. It would bring chaos when we need certainty. And it would bring delay when we need to move forward. So I believe this House should reject this motion. At this crucial moment in our nation's history, a general election is simply not in the national interest. Parliament decided to put the question of our membership of the European Union to the people. Parliament promised to abide by the result. Parliament invoked Article 50 to trigger the process. And now Parliament must finish the job. That's what the British people expect of us, and speaking to my constituents and to voters right across the country, that is what they demand. I will give way just in a moment. That is what they demand. But a general election would mean the opposite. Far from helping Parliament finish the job and fulfil our promise to the people of the United Kingdom, it would mean extending Article 50 and delaying Brexit for who knows how long. I will give way to the honourable gentleman and then...
Grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. She's lost a quarter of her cabinet. 170 members of her backbench want her gone. She's experienced the biggest defeat in parliamentary history. What shred of credibility has our government got left? For goodness sake, Prime Minister, won't you just go?
Can I say to you, the right honourable gentleman might not have noticed that what we're debating today is a vote of no confidence in the government. He has his opportunity to express his opinion in that vote.
As someone who was only defeated last night by 230 votes, may I encourage the Prime Minister to KBO and never tire of reminding the country that our good economic and one nation record will be put at risk by a very extreme left-wing and high taxation party.
Can I say to my honourable friend, he is absolutely right. I will speak about this later in my speech, but it is over the last years, since 2010, with Conservatives in government, that we've been able to turn this economy round, ensure jobs are provided for people and give people a better future. Now, I will be
for giving way. I totally agree with the Prime Minister that a general election would solve nothing. It's merely a tactical device by the opposition to cause chaos. But would she also agree with me that one thing we also need to rule out is a second referendum on our membership of the EU, which would be highly divisive and would not resolve the issues that we currently face?
My honourable friend is absolutely right in that a general election would cause the sort of delay that I've just been talking about. But he is also right. We had a referendum in 2016. I believe it is incumbent on this Parliament to deliver on the result of that referendum and to deliver Brexit. And as regards those issues, the choices we face as a country won't change after 4 or 5 weeks of campaigning for a general election. There's no indication it would solve the dilemma we now face. Not only, I will give way to my honourable friend in a minute, not only is there no guarantee an election would deliver a parliamentary majority for any single course of action. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Unlike some, she is clearly not afraid to debate. It is not exactly a secret that on European policy, she and I have not seen entirely eye to eye. And it is possible... Well, so's everybody else, Simon.
Not everybody.
And it is possible we will continue to disagree, but I am a Conservative first and last. And I know opportunism when I see it. Exactly. So can I tell her when the bells ring, the whole of the ERG will walk through the lobbies with her to vote this nonsense down?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his intervention? And I note what he said. I'm happy to carry on discussing with him our different views that we have had on the European issue. But it is absolutely clear that what the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, is trying to do is not going to help to resolve the issue of ensuring that we deliver on Brexit for the British people. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. In 2017, she went to the country and asked the country for a mandate. She lost her majority. Last night, she asked the House to back her deal. She saw the biggest defeat for a government vote in the history of this House. Last night, she said she wanted to open dialogue with the whole of this House, and yet she has refused to open that dialogue with the front bench. Does she not agree with me that this looks like more of a strategy to divide and conquer rather than take this House and the country together and work out how we move forward?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, what I said last night was that we would be opening discussions, having discussions across this House. There are many different opinions on the issue of how to deliver Brexit across this House. There are some views not to deliver Brexit across this House. I believe we should be delivering Brexit for people. What I made clear was that the first priority, should the Leader of the Opposition put a motion of no confidence down, would be to debate that motion of no confidence. I'm confident that the Government will retain the confidence of this House, and when that happens, I will set out the further steps we will take on discussions with members across the House. If members will just be a little patient. I have taken a number of interventions. I will make a little progress, but I will be generous in taking interventions. I think members know, from the number of hours I have spent in this House answering questions, that I am not afraid to answer questions from members of this House. But what we see when we look, I will in just a moment, if the Honourable Gentleman had listened to what I said, does help sometimes. We do not even know what position the Labour Party would take on Brexit in an election. Now, it's barely 18 months since this country, if my honourable friend would just allow me one, it's barely 18 months since this country last went to the polls, an election where well over 80% of voters, almost 27 million people, backed parties whose manifestos promised to deliver Brexit. That's what the Government intends to do. That's what's in the national interest, not the disruption, delay and expense of a fourth national poll in less than 4 years. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I thank the Prime Minister for giving way to me. Does she not agree with me that if the Leader of the Opposition himself wrote on a note exactly what he wanted, passed it to the Prime Minister adopted that, he would still vote against it?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because, of course, the position that the Leader of the Opposition took was that however good a deal for the United Kingdom the Government brought back, he would vote against it. However bad a deal the EU offered, he would vote for it. So he has no real national interest in getting the right answer for our country. I promise the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. And my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is absolutely right to call for a general election today, because it's not just the Government's record on Brexit which is at stake tonight. And I want to ask the Prime Minister a direct question. Is she surely saying that her record on policing and crime is one that she's willing to stand on? Because we have seen over 20,000 police officers cut since 2010. We see rising crime, we see rising knife crime, and we see money being diverted, instead of paying for police, paying for a no-deal Brexit, which nobody in this House wants to see happen.
The honourable gentleman talks about paying for police. Of course, we put more money into, made more money available to police forces. And what did the Labour Party do? The Labour voted against that. Yes, that's what they did. They voted against it. I will just make a little more progress, and I will take some more interventions. Now, last night the House did indeed speak clearly, and I heard the message that they sent. I heard the concerns of my colleagues and from across the House, and I understand them. And as I told the House last night, if the Government secures, and I've just repeated, if the Government secures the confidence of this House, then my first priority will be to hold meetings with my colleagues, with our confidence and supply partners, the DUP, and with senior parliamentarians from across the House. But our principles are clear: a deal that delivers a smooth and orderly exit, protecting our union, giving us control of our borders, laws and money, and allowing us to operate an independent trade policy. These are what deliver on the will of the British people. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I tried this with her earlier during question time, so I'm going to give her one more chance. Which of the red lines that she set that caused the defeat that she had last night is she willing to compromise on to get the agreement through?
Sensible question. And the honourable gentleman will not be surprised to hear that I will give him the same answer as I've just given in my comments, because what the honourable gentleman, what I would point out to the honourable gentleman, is that the key thing that this House needs to do, that this Parliament needs to do, is to deliver Brexit for the British people. That is what we need to do, and we need to do. I will in a minute. We need to deliver a Brexit that actually respects and reflects the vote that was taken in the 2016 referendum. I will give way to the honourable gentleman to come back, and then I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm trying to be helpful to the Prime Minister, believe it or not, but this is pure robotic fantasy. It's her deal that has to change, and the deal is a product of the red lines. So when she has that meeting with my right honourable friend, which of the red lines is she willing to give up on?
Yeah, exactly. And I repeat that we will approach these discussions in a constructive spirit. We want to hear the detail from the House of what it is that they want to see, such that we can secure the support of the House for a deal. I give way to my honourable friend.
My right honourable friend for giving way, unlike the Leader of the Opposition. Does she share my concerns that too many people in this House are trying to scupper the mandate given to us by the British people? For centuries, this House has taken arbitrary power from kings and queens and peers and grandees and has put that power in this House for the public good. But we now appear to be becoming that arbitrary power that is taking away and removing that mandate that we gave the British people. Will she fight to deliver on that mandate and to protect and preserve our democracy?
My honourable friend puts his point very powerfully indeed. This Parliament voted to ask the British people to say to them, it is your decision, not tell us what you think and we might think afterwards whether or not we like it. It is your decision and we will act on that decision. And what we want to do is, I will just make a little more progress if honourable members and right honourable members will. That is what we want to do, deliver on the will of the British people. As I said, I'll approach the meetings in a constructive spirit, focusing on ideas that are negotiable and have sufficient support in this House. And the aim is to identify what would be required to secure the backing of the House. And I will just make a little more progress. I have been already generous in interventions. If these talks bear fruit, as I said earlier in Prime Minister's questions, there would be in no doubt I will go back to Brussels and communicate them clearly to the European Union, and that's what members asked for. The leader of the SNP MPs said we should have talks with all the leaders of the opposition parties and work together in all our interests. The chairman of the Brexit Select Committee said if the deal was defeated, I would like to think that she would take a bold step, that she would reach out across the House to look for a consensus, and that's exactly what I propose to do. So I think it would be a little strange for them to vote against that approach later today and in favour of a general election that would make that process of reaching out across Parliament impossible. I'll give way to the honourable lady who has been standing several times.
I thank the Prime Minister for her generosity in giving way. But with all due respect to her, she's come to the House today after suffering a very, very large defeat indeed, with the same lines.
Absolutely.
And she's making the same assertions as she was making before the vote, like the vote never happened. Her Downing Street spokesperson said that any discussions would have to start and proceed from the red lines that she established herself. Doesn't she realise, in all honesty now, that the time has come for her to show some flexibility on those red lines and get us into a genuine discussion rather than just repeating the lines to take that we've heard for the last 5 months ad nauseum.
What I am doing is setting out what the British people voted for in the referendum in 2016. That is our duty as a Parliament to deliver on that. Now, I know that to serve, again, I will just make little progress. I know that to serve in government, in just a moment, I know that to serve in government is a unique privilege. The people of this country put their trust in you, and in return, you have the opportunity to make this country a better place for them. Just in a moment. When I became Prime Minister, and that is what I pledged to do, yes, to deliver Brexit, but also to govern on the side of working people right across the country for whom life is harder than it should be, and to build on the progress that had been made since 2010. I'll give way to the honourable lady and then to my honourable friend.
To the Prime Minister for giving way. The problem is the Prime Minister seems to be talking as if she'd lost by 30 votes yesterday, not 230. Her refusal to even consider changing any of her red lines when the EU and Irish government and others have made clear that the deal she got was dependent on those red lines is making this impossible. Can I ask her to clarify? Is she saying she will rule out in any circumstances a customs union?
I'm saying that what I want to see is what the British people voted for. They want to see... No! This is very important. They voted for an end to free movement. They voted for an independent trade policy. They voted to end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And it is incumbent on this Parliament to ensure that we deliver on that. And I think we should build on the progress... Oh, I said to my honourable friend... If the Fox will just allow me, I did say to my honourable friend that I would take him first, then I would take him.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. She's being criticised for setting and sticking to red lines, but don't those red lines simply represent the promises that were made prior to the referendum?
Can I say to my honourable friend, that's the point I have been making and repeating, is that when people voted to leave, they voted for certain things. They voted to ensure that we could have that independent trade policy and that we would end free movement, for example, and it's our duty to ensure we deliver those. I'll give way to the father.
Speaker, I've asked many people throughout the referendum why they voted on one side or the other. Got a very wide range of replies, but I have to say no one has ever told me they voted to leave in order that we could leave the customs union, or that we should be able, they wanted us to erect trade barriers between ourselves and the rest of Europe. Now, as she's committed as I am, I entirely support her aim of keeping open borders between ourselves and the rest of Europe. Is it not the case that there's nowhere in the world where two developed countries in any populated area are able to have an open border unless they have some form of customs union?
My right honourable and learned friend refers to, obviously, the various reasons. There were various reasons why people voted to leave the European Union. But when they were doing that, I believe that they did vote to ensure that we continue to have a good trading relationship with our nearest neighbours in the European Union. I want, but also to improve our trading relationships with others around the world. That is what we were searching for. That is what was in the political declaration for the future. That package was not voted through this House last night. I now, as I say, will talk to parliamentarians across the House to determine where we can secure the support of the House. But while delivering Brexit is an important and key element of government, it is also important that we build on the progress made since 2010 and lead this country towards the brighter, fairer, more prosperous future it deserves. And I'm going to make some progress before I take any further interventions. I believe that this government has a record to be proud of, a record that demonstrates that our policies and principles are more than words. In 2010, we inherited the gravest of economic situations, a recession in which almost $750,000 jobs were lost, a budget deficit of £1 borrowed for every £4 spent, and a welfare system that did not reward work. But in the 9 years since, thanks to the hard work and sacrifice of the British people, we have turned this country round. Our economy is growing, the deficit is down by 4/5, the national debt has begun its first sustained fall for a generation, the financial burden left for our children and grandchildren is shrinking by the day. And that is a record to be proud of. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for allowing me to intervene. Under her leadership, this government has become the first in British history to be found in contempt of Parliament. It has become the first in British history to lose by more than 200 votes on a primary policy matter. Homelessness has spiralled out of control. The usage of food banks has risen exponentially, and much more besides. So surely it is now time to act with humility and to do the right and honourable thing and to resign and call a general election.
Could I say to the honourable gentleman again, the whole point of this debate today is to determine whether this House has confidence in the government or whether it thinks there should be a general election. Now, I say that our record is a record to be proud of, but I know it's not enough. A strong economy alone is no good unless we use it to build a fairer society. One where wherever you are, wherever you live, and at every stage of your life, you know the government is on your side. Where growing up, you will get the best possible education, not because your parents can afford to pay for it, but because that is what every local school provides. Where your parents have a secure job to go to that pays a decent wage, where they get to keep more of the money they earn each month. That when you finish school, you know that you can go to university whether or not your parents went, or you can have an apprenticeship. That when you want to buy your first home, enough houses are being built so that you can afford to get a foot on the housing ladder. That when you want to get married, it doesn't matter whether you fall in love with someone of the same sex or opposite. And that when you have children of your own, you will be able to rely on our world-class NHS. That both parents can share their leave to look after their baby, and when they're ready to go back to work, the government will help with the costs of childcare. And that when you've worked hard all your life, you will get a good pension and security and dignity in your old age. And that is what this government is delivering. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I thank her for giving way. I thank her for giving way, and I acknowledge that she wants to paint her government in a good picture. But isn't it true that precisely because a lot of people are unhappy, they also voted for Brexit? And isn't it the case that we need to clarify with the British people what exactly they voted for, and need to put a precise deal in front of the people and not just make a general assumption why people voted for Brexit? People also voted for Brexit because they were generally unhappy with the state of this country. So isn't it the case now we need to put a precise Brexit deal in front of the people so all people can say, well, actually Brexit will make a difference?
Well, as the honourable lady might recall that when I became Prime Minister, I made exactly that point, that people in voting for Brexit, there were various reasons people voted for Brexit, but I do think for some they wanted a change in the way politics delivered for them. I think that they were concerned, that they felt that politicians weren't listening to them. And that is precisely why it is so important that on the result of the referendum, we listen and we deliver for the people of this country. And this government is delivering in a whole range of ways. I give way to
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and I appreciate the positive, confident and optimistic picture of the future of the UK that she painted. What a contrast to the Leader of the Opposition, who takes every opportunity to talk Britain down. How on earth can somebody claim that they aspire to be Prime Minister if they have such utter lack of confidence in Britain and the British people?
Absolutely. Anybody who wants to be Prime Minister should believe in this country and believe in the talents of our people. And that is so important. I'll give way to them.
I know the Prime Minister, thank you so much for being around this. I know there's so little time to get in all the achievements, but on the same note, you may...
Right. Here.
Colleagues may laugh, but it is this government who is taking the environment more seriously than any other government. We are putting sustainability first, and that is more important even than Brexit, because if we don't have a healthy environment, and our record on this is second to none, microbeads, ancient woodland protection, the clean air strategy and more, we would be lost.
can I thank my honourable friend? She has indeed set out an area where this government has been taking important action, and I'd like to commend the work that she's done on that, and the work of my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, in this area, because we are indeed leading the way in a number of ways on this. I will take my right honourable friend, and then I'm afraid I must make some progress because a number of people want to speak.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister. She is giving way considerably more than the Leader of the Opposition did. She has just mentioned the stewardship of the NHS under her leadership. Would she like to remind the Leader of the Opposition that it is this government that has just pledged through the NHS long-term plan 50% per annum more funding than was pledged by him at the last general election?
That is absolutely right. The biggest cash boost to the NHS in its history, a long-term plan that ensures its sustainability for the future. That's being delivered not by a Labour Party, but by the Conservatives in government. And if honourable and right honourable members will forgive me, I am conscious that the time is getting on, and there will be many members, and the right honourable member for Exeter is encouraging me not to take so many interventions and to get on with the thing. But we are building a country that works for everyone. But there is much more to do. Investing in our industrial strategy, so we're creating the jobs of the future in all parts of our country, not just in London and the South East. Delivering our long-term plan for the NHS that my right honourable member has just referred to, so that our most precious institution is equipped for the future. Tackling the lingering injustices that for too long have blighted the lives of too many people. Women being paid less than men. Mental health being treated with the same seriousness and resource and physical health. A criminal justice system that has poorer outcomes if you're black than if you're white, and an education system that has left white working-class boys as less likely to go to university than anyone else. These are issues we need to tackle, and the mission of this government will not stop. This is a government building a country that is more prosperous, a country that is fairer, and a country that works for everyone. And with the confidence of this House, we will go on delivering for Britain, driven by a passionate belief in doing what is right for our country and right for our people, acting not in self-interest, but in the national interest. And that is the simple mission that has underpinned our approach to the Brexit negotiations. And as we enter the next stage of that process, I have made clear I want to engage with colleagues across the House. Now, the question now is whether the Labour leadership will rise to the occasion. But I fear the answer is no, because, as the Labour leader himself has indicated, Brexit is the biggest issue this House and this country has faced for generations. What it demands from senior politicians is responsible leadership and pragmatic statesmanship. The Leader of the Opposition, as yet, has shown neither. His failure to set out a clear and consistent alternative solution is the third reason why this House should comprehensively reject this motion. Indeed, the Shadow Brexit Secretary has described Labour's position on Brexit as one of constructive ambiguity. I think the Shadow Trade Secretary called it something slightly more succinct, but definitely not parliamentary, and therefore I cannot repeat it. But I call it not being straight with the British people. Because for more than 2 years, the Leader of the Opposition has been either unable or unwilling to share anything other than vague aspirations, empty slogans and ideas with no grounding in reality. And when the President of the European Commission said Labour's Brexit ambitions would be impossible for the European Commission to agree to, the right honourable gentleman simply shrugged and said, "That's his view, I have a different view." But I have to say, well, if my honourable friend will just forgive me, I have to say last night, just for a moment, I thought that the Leader of the Opposition might surprise us all, because he told this House it was not enough to vote against the withdrawal agreement, and that we also have to be for something. So surely that was the moment. That was the point at which, after months of demanding that I stand aside and make way for him, he was going to reveal his alternative. We waited, but nothing came. He still faces both ways on whether Labour would keep freedom of movement, and he won't even be drawn on the most basic point of all. I referred in PMQs to the fact that on Sunday, When challenged as to whether, if there was a general election, he would campaign to leave the European Union, he refused to answer that question 5 times. He's refused to answer that question in response to members of this House today. The government has no doubt about its position. Under this government, the United Kingdom will leave the European Union, and we will respect the decision of the people. I will give way to my...
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. She's quite right to point out the yawning chasm at the heart of Labour's policy. But the Prime Minister also said we need to come up with a constructive alternative. And speaking to colleagues around the House, it strikes me very powerfully that there is one element of the currently proposed deal which, if changed, would make it much more likely to pass, and that is the backstop. Would the Prime Minister therefore consider contacting the European Commission's officials in the coming days and over the weekend and ask them to make legally binding changes to that backstop, which I believe would then have a very good chance of passing this House?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that the purpose of the various discussions we're going to have is to identify the issues that will secure the support of this House, and I will take those issues to the European Parliament. I will give way to the honourable gentleman, and then I am going to make progress so that others can speak in this debate.
I am extremely grateful for her giving way. She has been generous. She has talked about engagement with this House, and yesterday she referred to this House as the fulcrum of our democracy. Can I gently point out that she is the Prime Minister who went to the Supreme Court to stop us having engagement with this House? And the vote that we had yesterday was on the back of an amendment that she herself voted against. She talks about engagement with this House, but we have experienced nothing but hostility from the Prime Minister. Going forward, will she put her words into action? If not, she doesn't deserve to have the job in the first place.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I think he has been in this House on many occasions when I have come to listen to this House and have taken questions and answered questions from this House. In fact, it amounted from October through to December to a whole 24 hours spent answering questions in this House. But vital though Brexit is, there's much more to being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And that is, after all, the job to which the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, aspires. If I may just, if my right honourable friend will just bear with me, I do just want to make some progress. I understand a significant number of members have put in to speak, and by putting forward this motion, the right honourable gentleman is asking this House to accept that he could be the next Prime Minister. So how would he have faced some of the big challenges that I have faced as Prime Minister over the last 2.5 years? When Russia launched a chemical attack on the streets of Salisbury, I worked with our allies to degrade Russian intelligence capabilities and hold those responsible to account. His contribution was to suggest that we ask Russia to double-check the findings of our own scientists. When the Syrian regime used chemical weapons to murder innocent men, women and children in Douma, I stood with our allies to uphold the international consensus that the use of chemical weapons should not be tolerated. He wanted to give an effective veto on action to President Putin and the Russian government, the very government that was supporting the Syrian regime. This is the leader of the party of Attlee called for the dismantling of NATO. The leader of the party of Bevan says Britain should unilaterally disarm herself and cross our fingers that others follow suit. The leader of the party that helped deliver the Belfast Agreement invited IRA terrorists into this Parliament just weeks after their colleagues had murdered a member of this House. His leadership of the Labour Party has been a betrayal of everything that party has stood for. A betrayal of the vast majority of his MPs and a betrayal of millions of decent and patriotic Labour voters. And I look across the House and see backbench members who've spent years serving their country in office in a Labour government. But I fear that today that is simply not a party that many of its own MPs joined. And if we want to see what he would do to our country, we can do no better than look at what he has done to his party. Before he became Labour leader, nobody could have imagined that a party which had fought so hard against discrimination could become the banner under which racists and bigots, whose worldview is dominated by a But that is exactly what has happened under the leadership of the right honourable gentleman. British Jewish families who have lived here for generations are asking themselves where they should go if he ever becomes Prime Minister. That is what has happened under the leadership of the right honourable gentleman. What we've also seen is a Jewish Labour MP who had to hire a bodyguard to attend her own party conference under the leadership of the right honourable gentleman. What he's done to his party is a national tragedy. What he would do to our country would be a national calamity.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister for being so generous and engaging in a debate, and as ever she could teach a few people lessons on that. Can I just go back to the question or the intervention from the Honourable Member for Hove, though? He makes, if I may suggest, a very important point, that whilst the Prime Minister has been very generous, Mr. Speaker, in coming to this place and answering questions, the complaint is that we have been excluded in a meaningful way at the outset in helping to determine the principles upon which a Brexit deal should be negotiated. And for many of us, Prime Minister, in seeking to be true to the oath and the promises to our constituents and voting for things against our own government, we've been threatened with deselection, threats against our safety and even death threats. And I know how seriously she takes that, and I thank her for her kindness last week in the note she sent to me. Would she now make it clear to anybody listening to all of this that we here, especially on these benches, but it applies also to honourable and right honourable members opposite, given the very wise words and observations she's just made about the state of the Labour Party, that it would be wrong for anybody to be intimidated or bullied in any way at all, simply for coming here and being true to what they believe in and what they believe is in the national interest.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I think what she experienced I think last week was appalling. I understand that she has experienced other incidents more recently. And can I just say to her, I absolutely agree. Everybody in this House holds their opinions and their views with passion and commitment. And it should be right for everybody in this House to be able to express those views with passion, with commitment, and not feel that they are going to be subject to intimidation or harassment or bullying. I think that is very important. I'm sure that is a sentiment that commands approval across the whole of this House. And once again, I'm sorry to my right honourable friend for the experiences that she has gone through. Well, I will give way to the right honourable gentleman on this point, and then I am going to conclude and...
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister, but she must recognise that she has built a cage of red lines that produced a deal that was overwhelmingly rejected by this House. We rejected the deal because we rejected the cage. Now, this afternoon, she has yielded nothing about how any single one of those red lines will change. If she is not prepared to change, how on earth can we in this House continue to place a shred of confidence in her?
To the right honourable gentleman, first of all, the point I have made last night, the point I've repeatedly made here today, is that I will be talking to people across this House, talking to my own colleagues, talking to the DUP, talking to other parties, there are different groups of people within this House who have different views on this issue, and hearing from people and finding what will secure the confidence of this House in terms of securing the support of this House for the way in which we deliver Brexit. But actually, I noticed that perhaps it was serendipity that I allowed the right honourable gentleman to intervene on me just at the point at which I was going to say that if the Leader of the Opposition wins his vote tonight, what he would attempt to do is indeed to damage our country and to wreck our economy. And of course it was the right honourable gentleman who left that note. There is no money left after the last Labour General.
Mr. Speaker, was naive to honour a Treasury tradition that went back to Churchill with a text that is pretty much the same. But I was proud to be part of a team that stopped a recession becoming a depression. And this is the government. Hers is the government.
Order! Stop trying to shout other honourable or right honourable members down. Calm yourselves. Liam Byrne.
She was, of course, a member of the party that backed Labour's spending plans up to late 2009, and she is the one who's presided over a government that has doubled the size of the national debt.
What can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, yes, we did see what was happening in terms of the financial crisis and the impact that had, but of course what had happened was that a Labour Party in government had failed to take the steps to make sure that the party was in the country was in a position to be able to deal with those issues. What would we see? What would we see if we saw Labour win this vote tonight? They would wreck our economy. They'd spread division, undermine our national security. And, as I've said earlier, on the biggest question of our times, he provides no answers, no way forward, and nothing but evasion, contradiction, and political games. This House cannot and must not allow it. No, I'm about to conclude, so I'm not going to take any more interventions. We're living through a historic moment in our nation's history. Following the referendum that divided our nation in half, we dearly need to bring our country back together. And last night's vote showed that we do have a long way to go. But I don't believe a general election is the path to do that. And I don't believe that a government led by the Leader of the Opposition is the path to do that either. We must find the answer among ourselves in this House. And with the confidence of the House, this government will lead that process. Because this is the government that has already delivered record employment, put more money in the pockets of ordinary working people, and given the NHS the biggest cash boost it's ever received from any government of any colour. This is the government that is fighting the burning injustices of poverty, inequality and discrimination that for too long have blighted the lives of too many of our people. And it's the government that's building a country that works for everyone. And as we leave the European Union, we must raise our sights to the kind of country we want to be. A nation that can respond to a call from its people for change. A nation that can build a better future for every one of its people. A nation that knows moderation and pragmatism are not dirty words, but are how we work together to improve people's lives. That's our mission, it's what we're doing, and with the backing of the House, it is what we will continue to do. I'm proud of what we have achieved so far. I'm determined that the work will go on. In that I know we have the confidence of the country. We now ask for the confidence of this House. Reject this motion.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to follow the Prime Minister. Of course, I wish her no ill will, and if she does choose to resign today, can I wish her all the best for her future career. Mr. Speaker, in many respects, this is not a debate that we should be having. If we reflect on what happened last night, it is a government that brought its Brexit deal in front of Parliament, and it lost by a majority of 230. Mr. Speaker, something which is quite unprecedented. A defeat for the government with our own backbenchers and the opposition in a united manner voting against this government. And if we go back just a short few weeks to December, of course there was a motion of confidence in the Conservative Party, and in that situation a majority of government backbenchers voted against the Prime Minister. And let me say, when I go back and I listen to the intervention for the honourable gentleman from Rayleigh and Wickford, he said that the members of the ERG would be going through the lobbies to support the government tonight. And, Mr. Speaker, that does indeed say it all. It's the ERG that has captured the Prime Minister.
Exactly.
And the real reality of where we stand today is that when the Prime Minister went to the United Kingdom in an election in 2017 in anticipation of getting a majority, they got a bloody nose and she came back as a minority Prime Minister. Well, you know, you can only... I will give way in a second. I would say to the government benches, if you just settle down a little, you would love to be in the position that the Scottish National Party are in, because we have a majority of seats from the people of Scotland. I give way.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving. I thought perhaps he could just inform the House how many seats in Westminster, how many Westminster MPs did the SNP have before the 2017 election, and how many did they have after the 2017?
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for that intervention. Can I say to the Prime Minister, there are 59 seats in Scotland. The Scottish National Party hold 35 of them, a majority of seats. We have won every election to the Scottish Parliament since 27. The Prime Minister can only dream of being in a situation where she has a majority. But let's come back to the fundamentals of this. We have a Prime Minister that is captured by a right-wing Brexiteers. Because the issue is, when you have a minority, you have to be able to work across party. But we've got this. I will in a second. But we've got the situation that the Prime Minister is beholden to the DUP, but the DUP will only support her in very certain circumstances. This is not just, Mr. Speaker, about the defeat of the government last night on Brexit. It is a government that is stuck, that can't get its legislative programme through. It has no majority support in this House. It is a government that is past its time. And if the government had any humility, had any self-respect, it would reflect on the scale of that defeat last night. We shouldn't be having this motion of no confidence. The government should recognise it has no moral authority. The government, quite simply, should go.
Jacob Rees-Mogg. Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. But I think his speech is a little eccentric, Mr. Speaker. He seems to think that the ERG and the DUP control the Prime Minister. Why then did 120 of us vote against the Prime Minister yesterday? If we're in such control, we're clearly not doing it very well.
Exactly. Perhaps let me explain. The honourable gentleman, in supporting a motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister, as he did, clearly expressed that he doesn't have the confidence of the Prime Minister. And what the ERG is seeking to do is to make sure that the government delivers what they want, which is a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit perhaps, against the interests of the majority of the people in the United Kingdom. But here is the reality. Having listened very carefully to what the Prime Minister has said today, there is no change to the government's position. The red lines remain in place. And I fear that what is really going on is that we have a government that is seeking to run down the clock. In the knowledge that they have, and I will in a minute, safe in the knowledge that the Withdrawal Act has gone through, seeking to drive Parliament to the margins and to make sure that we do crash out of the European Union with no deal as a serious prospect. All of us, Mr. Speaker, should recognise the risks of no deal that no sane person in this House would support. And the government should unilaterally take that risk to all of us and to all our constituents off the table. I happily give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman. He must agree that the Prime Minister is a record setter. Record levels of poverty, record levels of homelessness, and now a record defeat in majority that any government has had. Now, maybe not in our lifetime. Do you think that majority will ever get beaten?
Well, I would say to my honourable friend, because he is my honourable friend, it's a record level of lack of humility that we see from this government, and he's absolutely right. We have had 10 years of austerity from this government. People are hurting. We can see that through the poverty figures. We can see it through the forecasts of the increase in poverty that will take place. And the harsh reality, I have to say to the honourable gentleman, we know from the government's own analysis that in any version of Brexit, that the economy of the United Kingdom will be weaker than it would be than if we stayed in the European Union. That is the fundamental point of this, and I say respectfully to the Prime Minister, I understand the issue of respecting the vote in 2016, but when the government knows that the economic circumstances of its citizens are going to be negatively affected, we have a responsibility to say to the people, on the basis of the information that we now have, we have a duty to go back to you, because nobody, Mr. Speaker, irrespective of how they voted in that referendum, voted to make themselves poorer. And I have to say, and I say it with respect to the Prime Minister, that it is shameful that we are not being honest with the people of this country. We need to waken up. We need to waken up, and let's take the announcement from Jaguar Land Rover. Now, I know there are many reasons why Jaguar Land Rover are restructuring. We know it's to do with diesel cars, we know it's to do with China. But at the same time, Jaguar Land Rover made it absolutely crystal clear that Brexit is a fundamental issue which is driving that restructuring. No government, Mr. Speaker, should be in the situation that it wants to put unemployment on the table, that unemployment is a price worth paying. That's what happened under Thatcher, and this government, at its peril, would take the risks with the economy and the livelihoods of the people of the United Kingdom.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. And it's surely not the time come for the country to see that the Tory party, not by their words, but by their actions, are now enacting a policy of moving us towards a no-deal Brexit.
I am very, very grateful from my dear and honourable friend for that point, because I have to say to this House, and I have to say to the people of the United Kingdom, I am worried. I am really worried about what we are doing. And the risk of a no deal is something which is unthinkable. I need to make, with respect, I know there are many people that want to speak, and I do have to make progress. I will take interventions later on. But we have to be honest with people as to what these risks are, and I can say to this House that we in Scotland want no part of it. If the Government and the Prime Minister wants to drive the bus over the cliff, we will not be in the passenger seat with this Government.
Neither are you, mate.
Mr. Speaker, you know, we often hear about the travails of the European Union, the nasty European Union, but I can tell you as someone that lives in the islands of Scotland that the European Union has been fantastic for our region. And you know, when I contrast the behaviour of the European Union with this Government, people in the Highlands are right to be angry. Mr. Speaker, the European Union agreed to give convergence uplift funds to our farmers and crofters on the basis of the low level of financial support that was in place. £160 million that should be handed over to Scottish crofters.
Where is it, David?
And where is it?
Where is it, indeed?
It hasn't been handed over. Where has been the Secretary of State for Scotland in defending the interests of Scottish farmers and Scottish crofters? Scottish farmers and crofters that will pay a heavy price for Brexit. And the institution that's been standing up wanting to support them is not this House, it's not this Government, it's the European Union. I know where I would put my... I will happily give way.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the right honourable member, first of all, for letting his party give me a seat in this place, but that is not for today.
Take it back.
Mr. Speaker, what the right honourable member says is quite correct, and it was a question that I put to the Prime Minister yesterday, which is that so much in terms of infrastructure projects would not have happened in my constituency had it not been for the European money, and this was crucial in halting the terrible drain of our brightest and best from the Highlands to leave and never return home again. That, I say, Mr. Speaker, is an issue that is hugely important to me, and it remains as such.
I thank the honourable gentleman. May I say to him it's the people of Caithness and Sutherland that give him a seat in this place, and that we all serve with the goodwill and the ongoing support of our constituents, something anyone should ever take for granted. But, Mr. Speaker, I do want to make progress. I apologise. I have talked about Brexit, but I want to go on to about the record of this Government. The Prime Minister talked about delivering a fairer society. Oh my goodness. Those of us that live in the Highlands have been in the pilot of universal credit, the damage which has been done to many of our people in many of our communities. I look at my colleagues in these benches, where I look at my honourable friend from Adrian Shotts, the member for Glasgow Central, if I look at the member for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, that day after day, week after week, have had to stand up and highlight the issues with universal credit, highlight the issues with the rape clause, highlight the issues with the two-child policy. And this Government has simply not listened to the damage that has been done. It's a Government obsessed with embedding a cruel and hostile environment for immigrants, their families and their children, and a Government that continues to deny the rights of 1950s women. When I first came into this House, I was the SNP pension spokesperson. I lost count of the number of debates that I called and spoke in, highlighting the injustice that millions of women faced. Women that had worked all their life on anticipation that there was a contract between them and the state, that they would get their state pension. Women, in some cases, were given as little as 14 months' notice that their pensionable age was going to increase by as much as 6 years. That's the heartlessness and the cruelty of this government that left many of them in poverty because they ripped up the contract because, Mr. Speaker, that's what it was between those individuals and the state. And I've appealed to the Prime Minister on many occasions to right that right. This government could easily have put its hands into the Treasury coffers. The National Insurance Fund sits at a surplus. I will happily give way.
Very grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and I would ask him, does he also agree with me that it is appalling that this government has slipped out in amongst all the news of Brexit, that they're making further changes to pensions, and that pensioners who have a partner under the age of pensions, they will have to claim universal credit instead?
Yep. My honourable friend is correct, and she's highlighted what this government's been doing, sneaking out these kind of announcements. I know that she is a doughty fighter for pensioners, as she will for young people, and we will stand up in this House for those that are affected that way. I will give way one more time.
Very grateful. He said earlier in his remarks that he's worried about economic growth, and I quite understand that, share that, those concerns. But is he also therefore worried that the Scottish economic growth is slowing, now growing at half the rate of the rest of the UK? And what is his party doing about that north of the border?
It's the wrong person to challenge without having done your homework.
Oh, good grief. And I have to say the honourable gentleman is mistaken that what has happened over the course of the last year, that growth in Scotland has overtaken that of the United Kingdom. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the majority of the controls of the Scottish economy don't sit with the Scottish Government, they sit with the Parliament here in London. We would dearly love to have full control of our destiny in Scotland, because one of the reasons that we desire independence is because our economic interests simply have not been looked after by Westminster. And you know, I will in a second, but let me just say this. When I look in the rear-view mirror and I look at Scotland over the course of the last 100 years, our population has barely grown. Generations of young people have had to leave Scotland because of lack of economic opportunity. That's not the Scottish Government that's responsible for that, it's for Westminster. And I am delighted that there's a report which has come out from Highlands and Islands Enterprise over the course of the last few days. For the first time, the trend of young people staying and living in the Highlands has turned around. That's because of the investment that the Scottish Government is putting in young people, despite the challenges that we face of austerity from this Conservative Government.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I do hope that the motion led by the Leader of the Opposition is successful this evening. Today, I believe, I was reminded today, is the 100th, since 1913. Well, nearly, it's an anniversary from 1913 of the Home Rule Act, one of the first Home Rule Acts for Ireland, which was agreed for by this House but defeated in the other place. And in terms of control, yet again, and that's with due reference to the Democratic Unionist Party, are in control of the government opposite. If the vote is successful this evening, can my right honourable friend assure me that the Scottish National Party will have no truck with any government funding the Democratic Unionist Party and their type of politics?
I'm very grateful, and there's a very simple answer to that, and it is yes, of course. Mr. Speaker, I have been generous in taking interventions. I need to move on because when I glance at my notes, I see I'm only at page 2, and I'm sure that honourable members will want me to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Conservative Government have let us all down. Westminster, once again, has proven that it can only let Scotland down. The Scottish National Party has no confidence in the UK government. Mr. Speaker, Scotland voted to remain. Now, let me say it again. Scotland voted to remain. I often hear the Prime Minister and others talking about the national interest. I would ask the Prime Minister to reflect on the fact that this is our nation of Scotland, in a family of nations. And when we were told in 2014 that if we stayed in the United Kingdom, that our rights as European citizens would be respected, what we find is that this government completely ignores the wishes of the Scottish people and wants to drag us out of the European Union against our will, to take away our rights that we have as EU citizens. Mr. Speaker, it can be no surprise that the contempt shown to Scotland by the Tories over the past couple of years has strengthened and reinforced the case for Scotland to be an independent country. Mr. Speaker, it's coming. Every reasonable attempt to compromise and to protect Scotland's interests by the Scottish Government has been spurned. The powers of the Scottish Parliament have been eroded. This place has taken back control. Well, I can hear the scoffing from the Tory benches, but when the Withdrawal Act went through, the SNP membership went up by 10,000 the next day, because the people of Scotland know that the Secretary of State for Scotland sat and did nothing, as the powers of Scotland over fishing, over farming, over agriculture, over the environment were taken back against the wishes of the Scottish Government.
Order. The House is overexcited, and although the right honourable gentleman is well able to look after himself, he must be heard. Sometimes there is a concerted and excessively noisy apparent attempt to interrupt, and that should not happen. Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
They are a curious bunch, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend, indeed all members across the House, to reflect on the fact that in 2014, sure, the Scottish people voted to stay in the UK, but 2 years later, they voted to stay in the EU. These two things are fundamentally incompatible because of the Prime Minister's desire to drag us out. So at some point, one will have to give. She might be able to delay that, but independence is inevitable, is it not?
Absolutely. Here. Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, it's coming yet for all that. Mr. Speaker, well, I will say this. I hope she's in office, because I can hear from a sedentary position about this issue about whether we can demand a referendum. I'll simply say to the Tory benches that you have to respect the sovereignty of the people of Scotland.
That's right.
Because however you dress it up, when the Scottish National Party went to the people of Scotland in 2016, we won the election on a mandate, if there's a material change of circumstances, that we may seek to have a referendum on independence. There is a majority in the Scottish Parliament. Parliament in Edinburgh voted for it. This House, in July, debated a motion on the claim of right that recognised the sovereignty of the Scottish people. This House accepted that motion.
That's right.
If and when the Scottish Government comes to Westminster and asks for a Section 30 agreement, this Government should respect the democracy and the sovereignty of the Scottish people and allow it. Mr. Speaker, Scotland will never, not ever forget, or will we forgive, the utter contempt shown to our nation by this Prime Minister and the Government. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and her Government cannot escape the reality. Her Government has led to political collapse in this country, hamstrung. This Government is completely frozen in its own failure. We have reached a dangerous impasse. With the clock ticking down, we need to remove this shambolic Conservative Government, extend Article 50, and yes, give the people of the United Kingdom a say.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and as ever he is giving a stunning account of the current situation. But does he agree with me that this Prime Minister has painted herself into this corner. She is going to have to give on at least some of her red lines, and it is deeply regrettable that she has waited till the 11th hour to reach out across the House, and that history will judge her on her deeds, not her words.
I absolutely agree, and of course, if I can make the reflection that in Scotland we do have a parliament which is elected by proportional representation. We are used to minority government. We're used to having to reach a consensus, and indeed, if I look at the motion which was passed by the Scottish Parliament on the issue of Brexit, it was supported by the Scottish National Party, by the Labour Party, by the Liberal Democrats, by the Greens. Prime Minister, that's how you do it. And the Prime Minister in this House has simply misunderstood the challenges of trying to reach a consensus across Parliament. She is working with her own Brexit extremists and failing to work to build a consensus across this Parliament. I must make progress, I'm sorry. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister does survive today, she must now act to extend Article 50 and legislate for a people's vote. Now, I must turn to the Labour Party. The Scottish National Party were the first to table a motion of no confidence, supported by others, by the Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru and the Greens. We asked for that to be debated before Christmas. Now, we knew yesterday that the Government was giving active consideration to allowing a debate to have that vote today on the motion that was laid down by the Scottish National Party and others. The Labour Party have been shamed into bringing this motion, a motion that we should have discussed before Christmas. I welcome that we are having this debate today, but on the basis of what happens today, I appeal to our friends and colleagues in the Labour Party that we have to work together to hold this government to account. And if we are to do that, then we have to recognise the harm that Brexit is going to do to all our constituents. It is time for the Leader of the Opposition, and I say respectfully to him, to recognise that there is no such thing as a jobs-first Brexit. That we have to recognise that if we want to protect the interests of our citizens, then it has to be a people's vote. We don't have time. We don't have time, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party have to join us in that campaign today. And I say this to the Leader of the Opposition. All the young people that voted Labour in England in 2017 will be paying a price from the Labour Party if Jeremy Corbyn does not give that leadership. So I say to the Leader of the Opposition, get off that fence, come and join us. Take that opportunity today. Tell us once and for all that Labour will back a people's vote.
No.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he mentioned the shame of the Labour Party. I wonder would he reflect on the shame of the Scottish National Party in Edinburgh on a day when college lecturers in Scotland are striking, when teachers in Scotland are considering industrial action, when waiting lists are going up and our educational standards are going down. That is the record of the SNP government in Scotland. Is he ashamed of that as well?
You know, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman used to sit in the Scottish Parliament. If he wants to debate devolved matters, I suggest he tries to get a seat back there again. But the issue...
Order! You always have a very amiable disposition, Mr. Kerr, but you are becoming a mildly exuberant denizen of the House. Dare I say it, even in your conduct a tad, to deploy the word used by the honourable gentleman for North East Somerset, eccentric. Now, calm, zen, restraint. Try to cultivate the air of the elder statesman. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud of the record of investment in public services by my government in Scotland. But the situation we face is austerity from Westminster, and we have taken the hard decisions. On the one hand, to ameliorate Tory austerity, but also to invest in our public services. And it's their Tory colleagues in the Scottish Parliament that want to cut taxes, that want to harden austerity, that will damage the interests of the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on and begin to conclude.
The people of Scotland wish to remain in the European Union. We want a country of opportunity, a nation free from poverty, a country where immigrants are welcome and where refugees are given refuge. We want a Scotland without austerity, a Scotland where pensioners are paid their fair share, where workers have fair and equal pay, a real living wage, a Scotland where all children are treated equally, where our health service is protected and valued, a nation that will be healthier, wealthier and happier. Mr. Speaker, the choice is clear. The United Kingdom is on a path to self-destruction. Without a change of course, Brexit will see our economy smaller, weaker, poorer. Mark Carney from the Bank of England said that Brexit had already cost each family £600. That's what's already happened, and we know that a hard Brexit will cost each household in Scotland £1,600, pushing struggling families to the brink and already poor families into destitution. Without single market and customs union membership, the future relationship can only be FTA, introducing barriers to Scottish companies' ability to trade. This will damage jobs, investment, productivity and the earnings and will hit the most disadvantaged in society hardest. As we know, Mr. Speaker, that people who choose to live and work in this country on these islands are net contributors to our economy. If net migration is reduced by a significant number, we will be poorer economically and fiscally. That would be catastrophic, not just for workers but for our economy. Mr. Speaker, after a decade of Tory austerity, our economy has already suffered enough. The SNP will not stand by and allow the UK government to ride roughshod over Scotland's future. This government must go, and it must go today. But, Mr. Speaker, I've said it before, and our First Minister of Scotland has reiterated it today. The only way for Scotland to protect its interests and for our nation to thrive is to once and forever be rid of this place and instead be an independent nation in the European Union.
Or, on account of the level of demand, a 5-minute limit on backbench speeches will now apply. Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, when my right honourable friend was winding up the debate yesterday evening, she said that our country could ultimately make a success of no deal. Although, of course, she was emphasising that she didn't believe that that was the best outcome. That was, of course, before the vote. And when we had the vote a few minutes later, then I think that the outcome of that vote is one that the Prime Minister certainly must respond to. Because the feeling in this House, 432 people, and I was one of them, is that the Prime Minister's deal, however good she thinks it is, we regard it as a bad deal. And I haven't heard anything from the Prime Minister that implies that she accepts the verdict of the House last night that we regard her deal as a bad deal. And the Prime Minister was right to anticipate such a scenario, because in her Lancaster House speech 2 years ago, she feared that the European Union would only offer us a bad deal, a punishment deal, as she put it. And she therefore emphasised that no deal would be better than a bad deal, and she emphasised the benefits that would come from a no deal, including our ability to be able to trade freely across the world, our ability to be able to enter into a new economic model, all the benefits that would come from being masters of our own destiny as an independent nation. And those were the benefits of no deal which she set out. Obviously, she, like everybody else, wanted to get a good deal. But as we have not got a good deal, I plead with my right honourable friend to ensure that she doesn't close the option of no deal. And indeed, she intensifies the preparations for no deal, because that is the best way of concentrating the minds of those in the European Union that we are serious about an alternative. If you go into a negotiation, you say, oh, the only alternative is to accept your deal or stay in the European Union, then what's going to happen? The European Union are holding us to ransom on that. What we need to be saying is that we are confident and believe in ourselves that we could be able to make a really great success of no deal. Unfortunately, that has not been the negotiating stance of the Prime Minister and her advisers, and we are suffering as a consequence of that. Last Saturday, Mr. Speaker, I had a public meeting in my constituency, and it was attended by over 200 people. There was a lot of anxiety expressed at that meeting about whether or not the Brexit that we had been promised would actually be delivered. And it's great to hear the Prime Minister reasserting her commitment to deliver Brexit. But if she doesn't deliver that on the deal that was rejected last night, then how is she going to deliver it if she rejects the no-deal alternative? And my constituents were very, very worried about the fact that they could see the referendum commitment to leaving the European Union somehow being undermined by the Prime Minister and by the government, and that in turn was undermining their trust. I'll give way very quickly.
He's making a compelling case that we should go back to Europe and renegotiate. He knows we're at the end of the process, time is running out. He also knows, and I think regrets, that we're not ready for no deal. Isn't he actually making a case then to extend Article 50 in order to get the right deal that he will support?
No, I'm not, because 2 years ago we were told by the Prime Minister that nothing was agreed till everything was agreed, and that everything was going to be agreed within 2 years. And we now know that nothing ever has been agreed effectively, certainly so far as the future relationship is concerned. Just trying to buy more time is not going to solve this problem. What needs to happen is that we need to leave the European Union on the 29th of March, and then we can have negotiations following on from that, when we will be standing on a level playing field, able to stand up for our own interests, and we will have called the European Union's bluff, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to undermine our ability to be able to do what we want to do in this situation. You expect, if you are unsuccessful in a conflict, that the victor will impose conditions upon the vanquished. What is happening here is that the European Union is seeking to impose conditions upon us because we have got the temerity to want to leave the European Union. That is wholly unacceptable, and the government's negotiating position, I think, has been supine throughout. Okay.
In terms of imposing conditions, if we go to no deal, we will go immediately to default WTO terms, including tariffs, for example, on lamb exporters of 40%, 12.5% of car, and we won't have a trade bill, it's not going to pass at the moment, to enable us to even do anything about it. Does he not see there are serious risks in that, going down that route?
Blind by ideology. Engage in trying to respond to all the scaremongering, and my honourable friend is good at the scaremongering. Let's recall the fact that our Prime Minister herself has said that no deal is better than a bad deal. The House of Commons has said that this is a bad deal. Therefore, why don't we go nap on no deal and get on with it, and actually thereby deliver for the people the result that they wanted in the referendum? And certainly my constituents are looking eagerly towards the prospect of being able to have no deal on the 29th of March. I asked, and I'm not going to give any more, I asked at the Brexit committee, I asked the Secretary of State responsible for leaving the European Union, I asked what would happen on the Irish border on the 30th of March, and it was conceded that there wouldn't be any difference to the current arrangements on the 30th of March. That is an example of the scaremongering that's going on about no deal. I regret that the government did not prepare more actively and further in advance for the no-deal option. But now we must not let the government benefit from its own incompetence by saying we don't think that we're ready for no deal. We should be ready for no deal on the 29th of March, and that's why we need to accelerate the preparations for it. If asked by my constituents, Mr. Speaker, if they have confidence in the government, their reply would be not a lot, but a heck of a lot more than in the Labour opposition. And certainly they will have even more confidence in the government if they are confident that the government is not ruling out no deal, is stepping up the preparations for no deal, and is able to confirm unequivocally again that we will be leaving the single market, the customs union, and we won't be in a situation where we have to have people coming into our country without any control over our borders?
Thank you. George Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, it's a great pleasure to follow the honourable member for Christchurch, and I think he just demonstrated why the Prime Minister's offer to reach out to every section of the House, every section of opinion on Brexit isn't going to work. There is nothing the Prime Minister could do that the honourable gentleman, other than a hard Brexit, that the honourable gentleman would accept. And that, I think, encapsulates part of the problem that the Prime Minister has to deal with. In the Prime Minister's statement to the House on Monday, I said that she had the real problem that she had, and the statement she had made didn't alter the fact that she had, first of all, no majority, and secondly, because she had no majority, no authority, and thirdly, because she had no authority, she had a government effectively were of no use to the country as a whole. I think I didn't quite use those words, but that's what it amounted to. I listened very carefully to the Prime Minister in the intervening periods, and she has offered nothing really that anyone could work with. Had she been in the mode she was in following the vote last night, 2 years ago, or even 18 months ago, reaching out across the chamber to different parties, different strands of opinion, might have produced something different that would have been acceptable to the vast majority of people. I voted for Article 50, like many others, in the hope that we would come up with a Brexit that would meet the expectations and hopes of my constituents. The problem is that the Prime Minister's deal didn't do that. And that's why we are now in the position we're in. Now, there's been a lot of comments about historical precedents in terms of Parliament and how long it is since a government was defeated by such a margin. And I decided in a conversation I had last night that I would look for other historical precedents that weren't about Parliament but were about treaties or deals or bilateral agreements. And I came across this one, Mr. Speaker, and it's the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494, and I think probably even the honourable member for North Somerset would struggle with that one. But it was a treaty effectively between Spain and Portugal, which tried to carve up the rest of Europe and decide who would get which colonies. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? The rest of Europe didn't agree with it, and it was eventually became defunct and never was implemented. And I rather think that the Prime Minister's deal rather resembles that treaty. Now, the Prime Minister fought the last general election on the slogan, Britain needed a strong and stable government. Well, after last night's events, I mean, we haven't had a strong and stable government since the election, but after last night's events, it certainly isn't strong. And all the speculation that's going on around what's going to happen over the next few weeks, it certainly isn't stable. And that's why I think this vote of no confidence is timely, but also necessary. Now, I just want to take issue with something the Prime Minister said in her speech, which I'm sure she meant it sincerely, but it doesn't represent what is the reality of life on the ground and in my constituency. She said in her speech that the government was, in justification for why the government wanted to go on, that she was fighting against poverty and inequality. Now, you know, look, it simply isn't true. My right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, went through a long list of problems in terms of policy and the delivery of public services as to why that's not true, and I won't repeat those. But in my constituency, this is a government that's
extremely grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I apologise for interrupting him. The opposition is very considerably disadvantaged by the malfunction of the timekeeping facility. Yes, I'm well aware of that. It's very... Order, they need to stand up. It is very unsatisfactory. Unfortunately, as I said to the House, I think, yesterday, those who put it right cannot do so while the House is sitting. But it is disadvantageous. I can appeal to the whips to try to keep members informed, and in deference to the seniority of the right honourable gentleman and in the expectation that he's approaching his peroration, I will happily allow him a further sentence. George Howarth.
The sentence. The further sentence is simply this.
Just to say to the right honourable gentleman, I do appreciate it is difficult. I appreciate it's difficult, but members do know what the minute situation is when they stand. They might not know the second situation, but they do know the minute situation. George Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, you know I always try to satisfy the demands you place on me, and I will do so now. I just want to say that the Prime Minister said the government was fighting poverty and inequality. She might try telling that to the over 8,000 people in my constituency who had to resort to food banks last year, 3,000 of which the parcels of which were distributed were for children. Is that a government that is fighting poverty and inequality? I think not, and it's a government that has run out of ideas and run out of time.
I appreciate the right honourable gentleman's cooperation. Neil Parish.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to speak in this debate. I have absolutely full confidence in this government, and I shall be voting against this motion tonight. As I've been recently surveying, canvassing in Axminster, in Seaton, in Tiverton, in Cullompton and many of my other towns, I am amazed at the true support for the Prime Minister out there on the street. It really is quite amazing. Absolutely. They recognise that she is a lady who has taken on an almost impossible job, Mr. Speaker, to actually fulfil the referendum result. There was a people's vote, and that people's vote took place in 2016. It was the largest vote in a generation, and there was a clear majority to leave the European Union. And that is precisely what we must do. But what is interesting, let's analyse this wonderful vote that happened last night. Let's actually analyse how we got to this massive figure of some 230 against. Because on one side, you had a number of people on the Labour benches that don't come clean with the fact that they want to stop Brexit altogether. I do have to pay tribute to the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalists. While I disagree with them fundamentally, the one thing they do is come out in the open and actually say they are in favour of remaining in the European Union. But if you want to deliver Brexit, it is the Prime Minister that can actually do it. So on the one side, we had people voting because they want to thwart Brexit on the other side. On my own side, we had people who wanted to make sure it was the toughest Brexit ever. Those two lots of people have absolutely nothing in common, Mr. Speaker, whatsoever. Because when the Leader of the Opposition, I will in a minute, when the Leader of the Opposition stood up at the end and said, of course, what we need now to do is stay in the customs union, immediately huge groans from my own side, because that's precisely what they didn't actually want to do. So therefore, the Prime Minister has to get this deal through. Now, I very much support the Democratic Unionists and the border in Northern Ireland to make sure that the whole of the United Kingdom is actually treated in the same way. So therefore, there is work to be done. But does a hard Brexit actually help the Northern Ireland Irish situation? Does it help food processing? Does it help agriculture? It certainly does not, because of huge tariffs potentially and huge problems in the border. And I know very well, and on the island of Ireland, there is always a huge mix of processing, from the pigs in the north to the lambs in the south to the milk, going all the way round the island of Ireland. So therefore, let's be absolutely sensible and let's decide to have Brexit, not go back to the people's vote. I will give way. No. You're okay, right? Well, you asked to intervene. He did ask to intervene just now. Yeah. Okay, right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to give my honourable friend the opportunity to reflect on the next part of his speech by intervening on him, and I'm grateful to him for giving way. Would he also agree with me that in the light of the parliamentary arithmetic last night on the vote, and the vote that we are faced with today, that it would be infinitely better for this country to have the continued leadership of a Prime Minister that has the experience of negotiating so far, because it's only somebody with that experience and that knowledge of the detail that can in fact reach out successfully across this House to try and find a solution to this intractable problem.
The right honourable lady is absolutely right, because we have a Prime Minister with experience. We have actually a Prime Minister that has actually stuck to her guns. That's what she is hugely criticised for, the fact that she has. We've got a leader of the opposition who actually can't work out whether he's in favour of a referendum, another referendum or not. He's not quite sure which way he would vote if there was a second referendum, and he also doesn't know if there was to be a general election, whether the Labour Party would take Britain out of the European Union or keep them in. So therefore, this is a leader that would actually negotiate with the European Union. Certainly not. It would never happen. And so therefore, we need to actually deliver. And when I talk to the people in my own constituency, and all of you across this House, whatever party you do, most people think, what on earth are we getting so worked up about? Why haven't we actually done it? And for goodness sake, get on and do it. And so why is it that, the Prime Minister is wrong and this House is right? Because I voted and campaigned Remain, but I actually accept the result of the referendum. But this House is not representative in any shape or form of the opinion of the people of this country, because people may have changed a little bit. You may have a second referendum and it might turn out that the result is 48% to leave and 52% to stay. What does that cure? Absolutely nothing. Let's have a third referendum, or let's have a fourth referendum. We have had a referendum and we need to deliver that. And I say in all sincerity, while I disagree entirely with the opposition, and I disagree entirely with the opposition for bringing forward this motion, what I do also say to my own side, clearly, Mr. Speaker, is that we are the party of government. We were elected to govern this country, and so therefore we have to make a decision. Yes. And we can't sit contemplating our navels forever as to whether we are going to make a decision or not. Because this idea that you just drive us and you'll get the hardest Brexit possible and it'll just about destroy British agriculture, because I know that the Brexit ministers and others are just waiting to pour cheap food into this country because they will actually want to see cheap food delivered under Brexit. And that will hugely affect our farmers. So for goodness sake, come together, let us all as a party govern this country properly and get a deal and get out of the European Union.
I think agreed.